Welcome everybody to the Federal Interagency Briefing for Fleet Maintenance Best Practices. We're glad that you guys got to be able to join us. And on this briefing with me today is Tom and KJ. They are both from Fleetpro. So say hey guys.
Hello there, I'm KJ. This is Tom.
Hello.
So with that, we'll get rolling. A quick disclaimer: this event is not affiliated or endorsed by any agency, and is provided to the audience for informational purposes only, and all participation in this briefing is voluntary, and any engagement by government personnel is not an indication of endorsement of to purchase from any vendor, including Fleetpro. So the main reason for doing that is so that we can dialogue, right, guys? So the idea is let's let this go, and we can absolutely talk about some of the issues that we're all having with our fleets. With that, you can open up your questions. You can open up that panel on the right-hand side, and you can put in questions, and you can enter those into those and send, or you can raise your hand, and we will be able to see that you would like to talk with us. And if you dialed in on the phone, please enter your audio pin, which is right there in that panel as well. And finally, we will be communicating via email as well, and you can send it to govsupport@fleetpro.com, and we'll do our best to be able to answer that. And that is right there the whole time. So if you have a question during the session, you can certainly do that as well. And one last housekeeping thing is, if you like the way that KJ and Tom look and the way that I look, you can make us bigger by dragging that bar and make us look bigger. If you don't like the way we look, you can make us disappear altogether if you want. So there you go. Real quick, we're going to talk to you about Fleetpro. We'll give you a high-level overview about Fleetpro and how you got started, the initiatives that are coming down, specifically the presidential orders and memoranda that become regulations for the federal folks. And we're going to talk specifically about why it makes sense to separate the PM and the repair components, and show you what a quality PMI system looks like and the requirements for those, because some of those are actually now mandated. So being able to give you those, we'll give you some case studies and examples of how things are working, and talk specifically about on-site versus off-site, do some questions and answers, talk about some ways of keeping you out of hot water and avoiding the gotchas, and look at some procurement options before we let you go at the end of this session. So real quick, my biggest fleet issue, we're going to do a quick poll here, my biggest fleet issue is, and it's either cost or downtime, the age of your fleet, or compliance to the regulations that are out there. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of polling for the folks that are here. So if you go ahead and fill that out for me, that'd be great. We'll give you another couple of seconds. It looks like right now we're split 50-50 with downtime. Well, now we're give you a little bit more time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and beautiful. Thank you very much. And just so you all know you're not alone, we have, with the exception of age, we have cost, we have downtime, and compliance to regulations, and compliance takes the lead. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about compliance today, right, fellas?
Yep.
That's right. So with that, tell us a little bit about Fleetpro, Tom, and how you managed to get this thing started back in 1982.
I had spent my first 18 years in business in the computer industry, and I was looking at the maintenance field and found that it was underutilizing computer systems. I saw that as an opportunity and decided to develop a fleet maintenance management system and to actually offer services. And so that's how I began the company in '82.
You were a young man back then.
I was. That was a long time ago.
So if I could, let me give you an overview of actually what we do. So we provide maintenance services to organizations that utilize fleet vehicles for their daily activities. Our customers look like government organizations, local municipal, state organizations, as well as private organizations that might be in construction or deliver the potato chips, or students, or what have you. Our territory is basically in the Mid-Atlantic region, and our customers operate vehicles that range from light-duty vehicles to heavy-duty trucks and off-road equipment, transit buses, school buses. Their fleets are typically anywhere from 50 to several thousand vehicles, and they're normally scattered and garaged at different locations throughout their jurisdiction. So our primary business is one piece of the maintenance pie. We're preventive maintenance and inspection focused. 100% of our services are delivered on site at our customer's location and off hours. We do have contracts that call for full maintenance or turnkey requirements where we're in charge with not only preventive maintenance and inspection, but repairs, fueling, daily servicing, washing, and we do that 24/7, 365. In addition to that, our preventive maintenance and inspection services are used in the form of third-party audit and contract compliance, where we go in and not only maybe inspect vehicles, but also inspect records and facilities. And then those PMI services are also used during contract turnover inspections, where a jurisdiction might be turning over the responsibility for maintenance from one contractor to another. So that's the long and short of it. We're a small business. We're Baltimore-based. Tom is the majority owner of the company and a veteran. So that should give you a thumbnail sketch.
Well, very good. Thank you very much. And just to let everybody know why we're here, of course, the main thing is keeping federal employees and the public safe, but also dealing with the costs that are associated with the fleet maintenance, the impact on the environment, which are some of the reasons why we see some of the executive orders that are in place. We're reviewing the best practices and exchange of ideas so that we can talk back and forth and talk about how we can best service the fleets that we manage and incorporate for the folks that are in the procurement side the best practices into the contract verbiage. So guess what? So that your agency can get its fleet done the way that it needs to be done and make sure that works. So with fleet management best practices, let's talk about those from an overview standpoint. We're going to be talking about 3 primary points. So who wants to take this one? The benefits of separating PMI and repair functions. We'll be talking about that. Quality, system requirements, and the most cost-effective way to implement your PMI mechanism. Any insight before we dive into these guys?
I think we can get right into the separating the PM function and the repair function. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be good.
Super.
Sorry, we got these are some of the.
Let me review some of the initiatives and the requirements, because there's a bunch of them here that affect all of fleets, include especially in the federal sector, but also in the state and private. We have Executive Order 13693. Which requires an effective PMI, and then it's reinforced by the FTA and Department of Transportation through specific rules as they're implemented. And tell us about this state of good repair for fleet assets. Tell us what that means.
Essentially, that means that the management and the government is calling on organizations that use, in the case of Executive Order 13693, fleets that operate 20 or more vehicles to make sure that we have good maintenance practices in place, that we're reducing emissions, that we're getting rid of excess vehicles, and the FTA and the DOT is doing the same thing with their transit operators. They want to make sure that their assets, they're being good stewards of their funds, and that their assets are being maintained in a state of good repair. And much of what we're going to be talking about today, preventive maintenance and inspection, has a direct impact on all of that.
In addition, metrics are recommended and in fact required to be developed and implemented in order to verify that fleets are being properly managed.
And that's a key, and it's also passed down through FHA, establishing those standards and programs. And as you said, Tom, these best practices are mandated. It's not a matter of whether or not you want to do them or not. They are mandated, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So with that, we'll also talk about the state regulations, which, guess what? It doesn't exclude the federal folks in often cases. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I guess in kind of summary, these regulations essentially are dictating really sound maintenance practices. These are things that you need to be doing. These are things that the manufacturer says you have to do. but you have to dot all your I's and cross all your T's, and that's a lot of what we're going to be going through today.
Positively. Very good. So with that, let's talk about why it's a good idea to separate the PMI and repair functions.
Well, to start off with, of course, we come from the school of thought that says maintenance is delivered best when you do separate those two functions. And one of the key reasons is that PMI is planned. You can plan for the parts. You can plan for the staffing required to do a PM service. Repairs it's an unknown. And so when you get into delivering a PMI service, you know that you're going to take 4 man-hours to do a PM on a heavy-duty truck, but you really don't know whether you have 0 hours, 1 hour, or 10 hours of follow-up work. So it's very difficult to manage that program and plan appropriately when you combine the two functions. The second reason is scheduling. The PMI workload requires a pretty consistent, steady flow of scheduled PMs. And once you get into combining the two functions, you know, if you got, we have crews that go out and will do 4 or 5 trucks in a night, and once you get into even the minor repairs where a hose or a belt might need to be repaired, things go wrong. A bolt gets broken, and now we're 2 hours into fixing that bolt. Now I got to go to the parts and find that bolt, and so fixing that minor repair now just blew my schedule for the rest of the night, and now I'm not going to get accomplished what we needed to get accomplished. So it really, when you combine the two functions, it really disrupts the scheduling flow, and the staffing issue is key as well. I mean, the quality, the qualified mechanics in today's environment, he needs to be trained on electronics, emission systems, computers. The vehicles are getting more complicated. That guy's an expensive guy, and you're going to get your best return for that guy if you simply feed him scheduled repairs that are identified through the inspection process. And you know, some folks say, well, you know, that's kind of what we use the dealers for. Well, if you've taken your truck to a dealer lately, or even driven by one, you know, the dealers' the latest craze with dealers is finding a remote parking location because their lots are it's filled with vehicles waiting to be serviced because they have the same problem you do. They have a shortage of qualified mechanics. So the key is, you know, staff your mechanic staff for PM guys and repair guys, and have those repair guys diagnosing and fixing stuff.
Absolutely.
And then the last kind of critical component, I think, is that there's a natural checks and balance that occurs when you separate the functions, and kind of a watchdog effect. It's really more common than not. You find repair mechanics get into jobs and uncover maybe an item or something that he doesn't want to repair because it's 3 o'clock, and so that item goes unreported. And it'll come back next when it breaks, and we'll fix it, and nobody's the wiser. And for those of you who use vendors to deliver repair and maintenance, vendor oversell issues are a huge problem. So simply separating the PM function from the repair function cuts that vendor oversell problem out.
Excellent. And that's, as we look at being able to formulate a process that eliminates some of those things, these are the key questions for folks here. Is one, do you have a PMI system in place today? Is it documented? And is it transparent to your fleet users? Tom, tell us, what does being transparent to fleet users really mean?
One of the most important things is you should be able to plan maintenance and be able to deliver maintenance properly without impacting the fleet users negatively. For example, let's perform the preventive maintenance when the fleet is not normally in use. Let's do it so that we have zero impact on the fleet, and in fact, the fleet doesn't even know that their vehicles are being maintained. That's transparency.
Awesome. And we're going to talk about documentation a little bit for sure, because I know that's a critical part of having that. Next, is it up to date? Is the system actually established using the regulations and the best practices for PMI standards? And could it stand to be improved from where you are today? And do you have key performance indicators, or KPIs? Huge nowadays when you start talking about being able to measure and improve your effectiveness. And with that, we're going to jump to another poll, and we're going to ask you what your system is like today. So is it documented? And you can choose as many as you like here. Is it documented? Is it transparent to fleet users? Is it up to date? Does it meet all the regulations and PMI standards? And does it use key performance indicators for best management? And it's okay if you're not in this position yet, because that's exactly why we're here to talk about how we can develop our fleets into that system. And I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. 5. In just a second. Let's see. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close the poll, and only one person answered the question, and they said it was documented, but all the rest are not. So, folks, we're all in the same boat, right? We all have the same issues, and that's the main reason why I wanted to ask that question, because so that you could see the impact that's happening across federal agencies, right? So, tell us about what's most critical in the best practices components, and one of the biggest things is your vehicle master files. Tell us what a vehicle master file is and what it means.
Well, let's back up just for a moment. When we talk about maintenance and what a key best practice system is, it's management. Management is planning, staffing, directing, controlling, and so to apply those things, systems had to be developed. One of those systems is a vehicle master file that contains all the key components covering vehicles. We're going to touch on that in just a moment. In fact, KJ, why don't you go ahead and take that?
Sure. Well, if you want to go to the next screen, Dave, the vehicle master file.
Yep. Well, actually, let me go through what we're going to talk about with the best practice components, because we have the scheduling, we have orders. We're going to review all these, right? The work orders, the exception and degree of severity, and I know that's near and dear to your heart too, as well, Tom. Out of service procedures and unit service history, and finally, recruitment and hiring, dealing with the labor pool, which we are, as you mentioned earlier, we're all in the same boat and having problems being able to staff those people, just like your car dealers, right? We're all in the same place. So with that, we'll get to the master file. Go ahead.
So this is an illustration of some of the detail that starts with identifying the requirements of services on a by vehicle basis. And if you operate fleets like we service, here's a visual of the hundreds of different year, makes, and models that the typical fleet has to deal with. And so it's critical that not only for the base unit, but for all the components of the vehicle, the transmissions, the differentials, all those things that need to be served on various intervals, that things are tracked. And if the illustration here, you see a couple of highlighted items, things like number of axles and number of wheels. That's where quality control comes into place, so that when vehicles are inspected, we can make sure that if it has 6 wheels, we have 6 brake inspections, we have 6 tire measurements. And here's where all of the fluid requirements and the filter requirements go, because again, it's hugely complex. And so once we have the vehicle master file set up, now we get into the scheduling requirements and system requirements. And so this illustrates, if you can see, this is in the left-hand column, you see company vehicle number. There's 10 entries for Unit 1209, and the highlighted in yellow columns tell you what those are. So not only do we have the base unit that needs to be serviced, in this case every 23 days, but its radiator, its air filter, its differentials, air dryers, all those need to be serviced under different intervals and tracked accordingly. And the key, the interesting thing is, as many of you might know, fleets track and schedule their vehicles under different intervals, and that could include hours, it could include miles, days, even fuel. So the scheduling system has to be capable of not only tracking that, but uploading that information, and so that we can project and schedule out in the horizon those units that are due for service.
And most importantly, we developed a scheduling algorithm that predicts when the next services, when the exact correct next services are due, and we have time to schedule that, communicate that requirement to the fleet user so that the vehicles are made available to us on a timely basis.
So now we know what's due for service. we have the parts and the staffing planned accordingly, and now we've got to coordinate that service. And the tool that is very effective in coordinating service is what we refer to, you may refer to it differently, as a fleet order. And the fleet order is the control document, if you will, that is used to coordinate with the fleet users. And this is a huge, typically underestimated task with large fleet vehicles. But what it does is it takes away the verbal commitment, I'm going to bring my vehicle to you, or you're going to come to my vehicle, or an email. This is a control document that allows for basically the handshake that, in this case, well, we have 9 vehicles scheduled. We understand what the priority of the units are to be scheduled, which vehicles definitely need to be done first, second, etc., and how long it's going to take to get there. And from the fleet user standpoint, or the fleet delivery standpoint, the expectation is that the fleet user, we're giving them the benefit of coming there, we're doing it off hours, we expect that those vehicles are going to be available, and so this is the handshake and the agreement that that's what's going to take place.
Super. That's now.
And then once we arrive at the location, then the work order is the next element of documentation. Yes,
absolutely. David? So this looks like a crazy thing, but it actually is very organized and goes through a specific flow, doesn't it?
There's a method to our madness here, but this is really, it's key. It's the tool that guides a technician through the inspection process. And if you look on your screen, you can see that, well, hopefully you can see that our work order is organized in 4 sections: the in-vehicle inspection, the exterior inspection, the undercarriage and engine inspection. But the key point that we're trying to make here is that a quality work order system not only does it have to be vehicle specific. This is a truck work order. A truck work order is completely different, and the inspection requirements are completely different than a light-duty vehicle, or from a loader, or a dozer, or a fire truck is different than a trash truck. So they need to be very vehicle specific. The other thing that's key is the work order, it needs to be sequenced so that it brings the technician through the inspection process. In this case, the example, you can see that line 1, the vehicle is inspected, and the technician actually starts when he gets to the vehicle. He's inspecting the handles, the steps, the doors, the seats, certificates, mirrors, and so it's the guideline, and it's a natural quality assurance built into the work order. And then a couple of other key elements are that, one, you got to make sure that your work order meets the federal and/or state regulatory requirements to document the service. And in many cases, as many of you might know, your customers, your fleet users, might want something more specific, so you have to have the capability to develop a more specific work order. And if we could, let's move into, so this kind of illustrates one of the industry problems when work orders aren't specific like that. On the left-hand side, you see what we would refer to as a typical industry work order compared to a one that has the quality elements built into delivering a consistent inspection. And so this illustrates a brake inspection. What you see highlighted on the left-hand side are the inspection items on this work order that cover the brake inspection. And on the right-hand side, you see the same thing, but there are 48 elements highlighted on this work order. And so the point we're trying to make is that if you give the work order on the left to a technician and expect him to inspect that brake system, and there's only one line item that covers all 48 items that are detailed in the regulation, they ain't going to get done. You have to detail these inspection items on the work order, bring the technician through so that he documents that each of these items were performed.
So what on the left side we're looking at it, and there you have one line item. There's a code that's associated with that actually does tie to all 48 of those, right?
Right, and if you look at that regulation and open the book, you're going to see all the 48 items that regulation says you have to inspect. So again, our school of thought is if they're not documented and put on the work order, what's the accountability that it was actually done?
Right, because there's no individual checklist. There's no way to really check or track that it was the person was, that you actually did what was necessary.
It gets real key when there's a problem, and someone takes you to task on the details of this work order and was it documented, or you get into a legal question about whether you actually inspected this item, and the more detailed, the better.
what you're starting to see is when we talk about regulations, and we're going to speak about them in just a few minutes, the regulations flow all the way through to this work order. Each and every element on these 282 elements that are on the work order on the right are tied to specific regulations that are required to be inspected.
And this gets into our training, which we're going to get into in a minute here.
All righty. Well, awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question of everybody is to say, your fleet work orders, are they typical? And this is normal, folks. So don't be afraid to answer. So are they typical, or are they detailed, or are you not quite sure if you have exactly what we're asking about? But probably, most instances they're going to be typical, right, guys?
Correct.
So we're gonna let the folks finish this up, and right now we're 50-50 between typical and not sure.
You give a prize for the correct answer here?
That's right. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom, here we go. So I'm going to share the results. So we have 40% that are typical, 20% that are detailed, and 40% that are not sure. So there you go. Appreciate you guys letting us know about that. And we'll get right back to this. We'll talk about what I know is one of Tom's favorite things, because the system that actually, I do believe that this was driven by you, and the government has adopted a lot of these things, haven't they?
Yes, that's actually the case. Let's look at this. What we have here is, in the previous slide, we were looking at a work order. What we have here is a summary of the results of what was found during the inspection performed by the trained inspectors. This is, in that process, there's a degree of severity that's assigned to each defect, because very honestly, some defects are more important than other defects.
Right.
Fleetpro came up with and implemented this system 25 years ago, and we call it the degree of severity exception report. It's a way of measuring the degree of severity and communicating the priority of a particular repair that's required. In fact, here is the CSA, which is the Compliance, Safety, and Accountability Handbook or guidelines done by the federal government. This came out 4 years ago, and it actually is a degree of severity-based system in order to do exactly the same thing that Fleetpro's been doing for the last 25 years.
So the key to this is that these degree of severity ratings are crucial in fixing stuff before it breaks. Because, and this is typical in the industry, vehicle comes in and for a service, and it's either broken or it's not broken. But what this allows the maintenance managers to do is identify those things that don't necessarily need to be fixed today, but need to be fixed before the vehicle's next PM, i.e., I can plan for it, I can staff for it, I can purchase my parts, etc. And the other interesting thing is that these degree of severity ratings, they can be counted. And if you go to the next slide, here's an example of one of our customers who uses our degrees of severity ratings to measure the performance of their various garages. And by utilizing, counting our degree of severities and weighting those severities, meaning that a level 4, which in our world is an out-of-service condition and is with much greater degree of importance and severity than, say, a level 1, which means get this scheduled before its next PMI service. But the results of it, essentially, if you look at this graph, which essentially shows 7 garages over 4 quarters and their performance, and look at the last column on the right with the yellow highlighted, the results of the reporting and the use of degree of severity ratings communicated where we had issues, communicated the overall status of the condition of the fleet in a heartbeat, and provides management with the tool to use to look at the effect of it. The overall degree of severity ratings went down over 4 quarters. So, and it's interesting that in this role, and with this customer, this is actually a very good maintenance organization. They have good maintenance practices. And when they go in to request their capital budgets, it's funny, most organizations go into meetings like that and say, well, we need more capital to replace our vehicles because they're old or they're run down. Not these guys. These guys go in and say, we have excellent maintenance practices. We get strong dollars for our used vehicles. And oh, by the way, we have this independent third-party inspector who comes in and verifies that we have good maintenance practices, and it shows and proves to the FTA, who's their funder, that they're being good stewards of their capital budgets for their fleet.
And KJ, let's tie this back to where we started with the executive order that we opened up with. These are the metrics that Fleetpro has had in place for over 25 years that actually accomplish what the executive order is talking about doing. Mm-hmm. Identifying where you have excess vehicles, making sure the vehicle's life is maximized, reducing overall cost, reducing emissions. So we have a system that's been in place for a decade, for 2 decades.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely. And I love the bottom part, which is measure the results across the segments and the entire fleet. And once you're measuring, it's easier to make your process improvements, right? So if you're not measuring, it's real easy for things to get out of control. And with that, there's a couple of, this is a standard piece of it as well, but you got to have it, right? You got to have out-of-service procedures.
Yeah, people call them lockout, tag-out procedures, but you got to have a process in place when you do find an out-of-service condition that it's tagged out.
But most importantly, you saw on the last slide, we started off with a high number of out-of-service conditions. For example, look at Garage 1. And what we're talking about is very severe numbers of defects. And in fact, all the garages had the same situation. So what happened over time is we reduced the number of out-of-service conditions, or level 4s. We reduced the number of level 3s. We moved down into level 2, which is a PMI failure, or most importantly, we moved into level 1s, which are, we have identified abnormal wear. We need to take some action to address this abnormal wear to extend the life of the asset. So
and the customer reduced it using our tool, but
yeah, absolutely. So we went through those, and we know that they have to be placed on the vehicle and they also have to be reported. So with that, let's talk about the history records for each unit that goes under service. One of the biggest things that it has to be is complete. And you mentioned this earlier. A byproduct of this is that you have documentation on your vehicles so that when you go to resale and resell those vehicles, everybody can see that this has been done all the way through the food chain, right?
Right. And the accountability of it goes both ways. It holds the maintenance shop accountable to deliver PM services on time, and tracks not only the date of the service, the mileage at each service, but the days between service, the mileage between service, hours between service. And so it's from an accounting standpoint, it's an excellent tool to use. Again, not just to track the base unit, but also its component. And we actually use this for things like warranty recovery, or more importantly, out of policy warranty recovery, where vehicles may have gone out of their warranty based on time, but maybe by a month or a day or two. But when you show this to the manufacturer and you show, well, we've serviced this vehicle on time every time for the last 4 times within a year, and we expect some out-of-policy recovery because we didn't expect our vehicle to fail in 18 months. So those things they're very beneficial. And not only that, you just never know when you're going to be called to task on things like government audits to make sure that you're delivering PMs based on what the manufacturer recommends and based on what the regulations require.
So let's say there is an audit either by the IG or somebody else coming in to say, how are we managing our fleet? What's the turnaround for being able to deliver something, the history records and all the components that are associated with the fleet management? How long does that take?
It's instantaneous. So, I mean, at any time that these records are required, it's literally click these are up to date daily and available anytime, so no time at all. So
any point in time, anybody can come in and see the status of the fleet and be able to, even down to the vehicle and its components, even
transmissions, differentials, even air filters, all those things that need to be tracked and scheduled on intervals that are different or more extended than the engine and the chassis, if you will.
And customers can go online and find this information online in our database.
Awesome.
Okay, next
That's
slide.
perfect. All right, very good. And I know that this is one of the pieces that Tom really loves as well, and that is dealing with the issues with the labor pool and being able to recruit the right kind of people, hire the right kind of people, and train the right kind of people, and talk about some of the challenges there, because these are pretty serious, right?
Well,
That's how we got all our gray hairs.
yeah, I'm actually only 32 years old. No, really, recruitment, hiring, and training is, once you have this system, you can develop the best system in the world. However, if you don't have people to implement it, and they aren't properly directed, they aren't properly trained, they aren't given the resources to do the job, it's not going to work. And so we found out very early in our process, over 25 years ago, that we had to build our own people. We had to grow organically. We couldn't just go hire people that were already trained, that already existed. You can't find them. And to make it even more complex, the number of vehicles, types of bodies, the system, the computerization, everything is so complex. Then there aren't published standards for preventive maintenance and inspection. So it's extraordinarily difficult. If we go on the next portion of this, so the labor pool, when we couple this, in the maintenance area, we unfortunately have some poor reading and writing skills. So training technicians to identify and document defects early before breakdowns, that is a tough job. To do that, Fleetpro took the regulations. And the regulations were the Federal Highway Administration regulations, 393, 396, Appendix G. We took CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance regulations, a book of 300 pages long. And what we did is, in a MIPS partnership program, we developed training programs to teach these regulations, they're the law, to technicians. We actually had to address a 5th grade reading level. We had professors of instructional course development assist us over a 3-year period in developing this series of training programs.
So you can see it's trench warfare when it comes to recruiting and training.
And so, you just mentioned these. You have Title 49 code, you have CVSA, and then you have the state requirements on top of that for the regions that you have your vehicles and your fleets, right? So
everything excuse me, David, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Our entire system was founded upon meeting these regulations, and we used the regulations to develop the training programs, to develop the documentation, to support it, to deliver the quality services to the fleets.
Love it. All right, so next question we have here is, my fleet is maintained, let's see, because this will be an interesting one. On-site or off-site? Which one is yours? Is it off-site or on-site? Just let us know what you have, and we'll and that can include you know, dealers, can go, you know, Jiffy Lube kind of stuff, and all those things, right? So let us know what you got, and we'll give you another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and boom. Very good. So we'll share those. 83% are off-site, and 17% are on-site. Does that surprise you guys?
Probably. I mean, that says a lot of folks are using vendors to deliver their maintenance and not staffing up to in-house to do that. So, no, I'm not really surprised by it. I can't say that.
Cool. Well, let's talk about a comparison between those, as I think this will be interesting for folks that are doing the off-site and the on-site as well. So if you take a look at this fleet comparison, 350 trucks, PMI services on-site, and the services are performed during normal fleet idle time, which is critical, right, KJ?
Yep, and of all the elements that we've talked about so far in terms of what's required in a quality PMI system, I think this one that has the most impact is delivering the services on site. And unfortunately, It's something that is not necessarily in the savings, if you will. The benefits aren't necessarily something that's in someone's budget. It's not a line item in the maintenance budget. It may not even be a line item in the user department budget, but they're real. They're soft dollar savings, but they're very real dollars. Here's an example of this 350 unit fleet having shuttle cost reductions in 1 year alone. That's 200 grand over since 2009, $1.9 million. And look at the reduction in the downtime, over 6,600 hours in 1 year, meaning that you never had to take the vehicle out of service for PM. 53,000 hours over, since 2009, and some support for going green efforts. You take 1,500 gallons of fuel that you don't use, and 14,000 since 2009. So it certainly is a contributor to your going green efforts.
And I want to talk with the procurement people for just a little bit, because we know some folks are stovepiped into some very specific procurement type things, but the others are seeing all of these different purchases at different times. And this is where you can go to your agency heads and say, hey, I have an idea that may be able to effectively eliminate the shuttle costs, in the downtime hours, things like that, but the fuel gallons saved, that's dollars as well, right? So the idea is, how can we think a little bit differently without being totally crazy about things, but being able to take that upstream and say, hey, if we look at this just a little bit differently, we may be able to positively affect our budget. And we know that budgets are getting restricted, especially when it comes to things like this. And if we have those dollars that we can utilize for something else, especially for some of the specialty vehicles or things like that we can use them for. So those are some areas that I think are really, really important for the procurement folks to know, that you can play a key role here in being able to help your
and the
effectiveness of your organization.
In terms of the green efforts, while the fuel savings here maybe not be significant, the reduction in emissions in the new vehicle technology has been reduced already by 90%. So even those little things, they contributed. And so, like Kermit said, it ain't easy being green. You have to take these things as you can get them. So
that's right. Not easy being green. All right. So tell us about what it means to have an on-site PMI delivery and the requirements there.
We are really focused on separating the repairs from the on-site PMI. And the key here is, if you do the effective PMI, you reduce the number of repairs you need. So the bottom line is, it is very effective to have mobile service trucks to come out on location, off hours, and provide the appropriate services at the right time. We have the built-in logistics management system and remote labor management systems in the Fleetpro system that support that.
And if you're going to do it, you have to have both of those, right? You have to have the logistics management and be able to handle the remote labor management too.
I mean, you have numbers of vehicle locations, you have service areas, directions, maps, vehicle and gate key requirements, reporting information, technical information, time and labor control, crew safety and efficiency processes. There's just a myriad of things that are addressed in the Fleetpro system in order to perform on-site PMI successfully.
Absolutely. So let's just bring this home, because we only have a couple more minutes. We're actually a little bit over already, but we want to get to a couple of the questions. So in summary, the high-quality on-site PMI reduces the cost and increases the productivity. Check this out. Direct repair and maintenance costs can be cut by 10% to 30% plus. And then you have the indirect savings that KJ was talking about, and these are the soft costs, but they're just as real, right, KJ? They're just as real, with the reduction of excess vehicles, shuttle costs, all of those, the efficiencies of having your fleet available and all those things.
Yep.
Right?
And, absolutely, and we have several case studies that show that, but the bottom line is not only the 10 to 30% reduction in repair costs are great, and they are achievable by delivering these sort of elements within your PMI system. But the other savings, the shuttle cost, the potential for capital reductions, because you don't need as many spare vehicles because you're never taking the vehicles out of service for PMI, those are huge. Those are even more than the direct savings you get from a reduction in repair costs. So that's kind of the summary of it. Again, I don't know if you want to go through all the case studies, but we can give you copies of them. But they just reiterate kind of some of the things that we're talking about now.
Yeah, and we'll touch on a couple of those. Real quick, before we move any further, we're going to answer a couple of questions. And one of the questions is, will there be other briefings? And the answer is yes, we will be doing briefings, but we're going to leave everybody alone in the federal government till October, November timeline, because we know that it is insane right now. Can you provide sample scopes of work? And the answer to that is?
Absolutely, yep.
Sure. So we can provide sample scopes of work. And if there's any other particular questions, yes, there's another one about will we make the presentation available? Yes, we will, and that will be there as well. And we'll get to some of the other leading questions. There may be another one coming that I see somebody typing, but it's not there yet. So we're gonna roll through this next one, and we'll include that in the follow-up. How about that? So real quick case studies, and we'll supply these as well because we're out of time. But one of the key things, keeping people from getting sued because of poor maintenance is one, and the government is victim to that as well, aren't they?
Yes, and or supplying the required documents from keeping being sued because when there is an incident, the first things lawyers do is look for the slightest hint of noncompliance. So that's when I said earlier, cross your I's, dot your T's. That's what I'm talking about. That's
right, exactly. So we have some from state fleets. Here's a city fleet where they lowered their costs by 38%. The privatization of preventative maintenance, which is what we're talking about here, in most instances is privatized in the government. Every once in a while you have a few, but most of those. Spends less on vehicle and equipment repairs than it did in 1990. That's some pretty serious results there as well when you're implementing these types of pieces. Here's another one from the state government. Reimbursement costs. That's something we really didn't talk about when there's overage or you need to use your own vehicle, right? We didn't even talk about that, but there's another soft cost that...
Yep, here in the state of Maryland, when state vehicles aren't available for service, employees are required to use their own vehicle and they get paid accordingly. But in this case, not only did the customer experience a reduction in their overall repair and maintenance costs, but because vehicle availability was better, their reimbursement costs went down 22%, and it was a huge number. It was the most significant number.
That's impressive. So there's you have operating costs and everything associated with that. With that, I'm going to get to the next poll, which is I need help with, and we will certainly reach out to you. So a current fleet problem, creating a best practices requirement, understanding how we can save on fleet maintenance, getting my fleet compliant with regulations, something else, please contact me. Just pick one of those and let us know if there's anything that we can help you with, and we will work through that. Give you a couple more seconds because we know that we gave a whole lot of information. And we're running a few minutes over, so we want to be cognizant of your time. So with that, I'm going to close this at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and look at this. So we have creating a best practices requirement and understanding how we can save on fleet maintenance. So both of those, we will make sure that we get some additional information for the folks that were in both of those categories. So with that, I'm going to run through this real quick of staying out of hot water, because this is where you wind up getting yourself in trouble, whether it's legally or just the legal pieces nowadays, being on CNN and all the rest of the things, because something goes wrong. So make sure your system is fully compliant with the regs and separate those PMI and repair functions. Make sure that they're separated. Implement the acquisition using the best practices standards that we've talked about today. Make sure that you're putting those into those requirements, and include the training process requirement in the statement of work. Why? Because if you don't, that's the weak link within everybody's system. Right, Tom?
Absolutely.
Right. So, and here's another one. Verify the contractor personnel credentials, and especially the training certs, and make sure that they're real.
Yeah, documented training, it's easy to say you have, but most of the RFPs that we respond to have requirements that you need to prove that there's documentation that they've been in use and that the credentials are available of the individuals who went through those training programs.
It's very easy for responders to RFPs to check a box.
Isn't that the truth?
It's very difficult to manufacture test certification records.
Very, very true. And on the procurement side, here's something that I know a little bit about, is establishing and using blanket purchase agreements. Gives you faster access to the right vendors, access to industry experts, and it minimizes the paperwork. And guess what? Right now we see a ton of that happening in the federal space, right? Because we're all deluged by it. So with that, closing remarks on these, again, reiterating, separating those contracts, right? Separating those functions.
Yeah, I think we kind of said it, but we think there's truly opportunity when you implement best practices, especially in preventive maintenance and inspection, to achieve the goals. You know, delivering PM services off hours and reducing downtime and cutting the overall, you know, improving productivity and reducing costs. That's what it's all about. But again, I think in delivering those services and implementing these things, you also give yourself a better than even chance of meeting all the mandates that we talked about earlier by the federal, state, and local jurisdictions.
Positively. Awesome. And with that, I'm going to talk real briefly about procurement options. There's a DUNS number, cage code. We're working on GSAs, right, where we're going to get into GSA schedule. But as KJ mentioned earlier, veteran-owned small business, so we can do things that way. We also have GSA partners, service disabled partners, 8A, woman-owned, whatever it is you need. Hub Zone on the procurement side. We will help you get there and connect those dots. Okay, so quickly on the follow-up, you will receive a link to the presentation, questions and answers for folks that have been asking questions. There is one. We'll have to take that offline because it's kind of detailed, and we'll provide you supporting documents on that with the Fleetpro capabilities as well as procurement options and the sample scope of work for PMI that was asked for earlier. So that's great. And with that, we just want to say thanks for being here. Any parting comments for everybody here, Tom and KJ?
Thank you very much. This has been great. Been fun.
Thank you for all your time today.
Absolutely. Excellent. And we will leave you alone until after September 30th, and we'll sure be talking again with a briefing in October. So thanks so much, and we will see you guys later. Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.